Okay, today we're going to look at two more short stories. First, A&P by John Updike. And it's worth noting that the short story, was written or published in 1961, because that has somewhat to do with, how we understand what Sammy does in this short story and how outrageous these girls' behavior is. So it starts with, in walks these three girls in nothing but bathing suits. Okay. And so it's kind of hard for us, maybe today, to understand how shocking that might be to the people in a grocery store. That's what A&P is. It would be sort of like a Safeway or Lucky store uh, on the East Coast. Okay. And so you picture three girls walking into a Safeway wearing nothing but bathing suits. You might find that a bit odd today, but in 1961 it would be a little bit more shocking. I guess the the closest I can think of, if you saw a grown man walking into a Safeway wearing like just a speedo or a thong or something. Okay, that would be kind of surprising. Not so surprising that you feel you need to call somebody, but you would just find that, that's strange and maybe a little uncomfortable. Okay, so these three girls walk in, and we have Sammy, who is a young man working at the cash register of an A&P. And so it certainly is interesting, and it seems when he talks about his job, it's kind of a boring job. It's a lot of it is customer service, and so he's paying attention to these three girls, as are other people, males who are working in the store. Okay, but you could even tell, I think, early on that even the girls kind of know they're pushing the envelope quite a bit. They don't have shoes on. Okay, and if we skip down to on this page 92, and we look at maybe like 15 lines from the bottom, she kind of led them. This would be the girl he refers to as the queen or queenie. And the other two peeking around, making their shoulders round. She didn't look around, not this queen. She just walked straight on slowly on these long white prima donna legs. She came down a little hard on her heels, as if she didn't walk on bare feet that much, putting down her heels and letting the weight move along to her toes, as if she was testing the floor on every step, putting a little more deliberate action into it. Okay, so she's kind of the leader. She clearly is a person who's more likely not walking around barefoot, but perhaps with heels on. Sammy's very observant. And so she's kind of leading, and you can tell the other ones are kind of almost hiding behind her, but she's just sort of leading the pack. And if you look at the bottom of that paragraph, but you got the idea that she had talked the other two into coming in here with her, and now she was showing them how to do it. Walk slow, hold yourself straight. Okay, and so this is an act of rebellion, but it's sort of teenage rebellion. And what Queenie is trying to do is she's trying to sort of lead this act of rebellion, and it's just hold yourself straight. You have nothing to be embarrassed about. This is how you do it. Okay. What's interesting then is the reaction to the other customers. On page 93, almost exactly halfway down the page, referring to the other customers, and he calls them the sheep. In another place, he calls them pigs in a chute. Okay. And so the customers, except for these three girls, are sheep. The sheep pushing their carts down the aisle. The girls were walking against the usual traffic. Not that we have one-way signs or anything. We're pretty hilarious. So if you look at the other people in the store, the other customers calling them sheep, the sheep are pretty hilarious. You could see them when Queenie's white shoulders dawn on them, kind of jerk or hop or hiccup, but their eyes snapped back to their own baskets, and on they pushed. I bet you could set off dynamite in an A&P, and the people would by and large keep reaching and checking oatmeal off their list, muttering, let me see, there was a third thing, began with A, asparagus? No, yes, applesauce, or whatever it is they do mutter. But there was no doubt this jiggled them. A few house slaves in pin curlers even looked around after pushing their carts past to make sure what they'd seen was correct. Okay, well, today, generally speaking, you don't go into the Safeway wearing curlers in your hair either. But again, it's just what these three girls were doing, wearing bathing suits, was just so out of the ordinary. And yet, the sheep they notice, they absolutely notice. They sort of like have a little starter, a jump, but then they pretend not to notice. Okay, and so this is what makes them sheep. They conform. Okay, they go the right way down the aisle, even though there's no actual sign saying what the right way is. Okay, and so we have this mild act of rebellion, and we have this contrast, don't we? We have these three girls who are walking in with this act of rebellion. Would be more mild today, if it even would be a rebellion today, than in 1961. But we have these three girls walking in, as if to say there's nothing wrong with the way we are. And then you have the other customers who are described as sheep and pretending they're not seeing anything. Okay, and that's quite a contrast, isn't it? Okay, and I think that's really going to be sort of leading to what Sammy's conflict is. Ultimately, I suppose it's with whom does he more closely identify? Does he more identify with the rebellious side or with the sheep? Does he want to be one of the sheep? Does he want to grow up to be sort of a conventional person like that? And it never really occurred to him until this moment. Okay, she's going to get just some fancy Kingfish fancy herring snacks in pure sour cream, and that she only wants to get this one item. And then we say, the girls are coming up. And if we look around, the second to last paragraph, they're there, they're leaving, they're being checked out, they're just buying this one thing. Then everybody's luck begins to run out. Lengel, he's the manager, comes in from haggling with the truck full of cabbages on the lot. So this is what his life is. Lengel's life is haggling over a truck full of cabbages on the lot, and is about to scuttle into that door marked manager. So he's about to go and, not make a comment, not see anything, behind which he hides all day. When the girls touch his eye, Lengel's pretty dreary, teaches Sunday school and the rest, but he doesn't miss that much. He comes over and says, "Girls, this isn't the beach." Okay, now, Lengel had a choice. Lengel could have just let it go, could have rolled his eyes, could have gone into the manager's office, pretend he didn't say anything. And these three girls are on their way out, okay? But there is that type of person who can't let something like this go, cannot just sort of ignore it and just let it go. He's in charge. He's the manager, okay? He's the person the sheep count on to keep things from going too crazy. I guess he's the shepherd, okay? And so he says, "Girls, this isn't the beach." So he states something which is completely obvious, right? And so, but he wants, the implication is, you're not dressed appropriately to come into this grocery store. Queenie blushes, though maybe it's just a brush of sunburn I was noticing for the first time now that she was so close. "My mother asked me to pick up a jar of herring snacks." Her voice kind of startled me, the way voices do when you see the people first, coming out so flat and dumb, yet kind of tony too, the way it ticked over "pick up" and "snacked." All of a sudden, I slid right down her voice into her living room. So now he's having sort of an imagination of what her life is like. Her father and the other men were standing around in ice cream coats and bow ties. It's almost certainly not true. And the women were in sandals, picking up herring snacks on a toothpick off a big glass plate. And they were all holding drinks the color of water with olives and sprigs of mint in them. When my parents have someone over, they get lemonade, or if it's a real racy affair, Schlitz in tall glasses they'll do it every time, cartoons stenciled on. So Schlitz is a malt liquor, not really a very expensive one, okay? So he's imagining the difference between sort of his family life and these fancy cocktail parties he imagines these girls go home to. "That's all right," Lengel said, "but this isn't the beach." His repeating this struck me as funny, as if it had just occurred to him. He'd been thinking all these years the A&P was a great big sand dune, and he was the head lifeguard. He didn't like my smiling. As I say, he doesn't miss much, but he concentrates on giving the girls that sad Sunday school superintendent stare. Okay, and she says, "Well, we weren't doing anything wrong. We just came in for one thing." And he says to her, "We want you decently dressed when you come in here." Okay, now when he says that to her, then Queenie, he thinks of her as, "We are decent," she says suddenly, her lower lip pushing, getting sore now that she remembers her place, a place from which the crowd that runs the A&P must look pretty crummy. Fancy herring snacks flashed in her very blue eyes. So she's probably thinking, here she is with this act of rebellion going in. And at first, an adult, any adult, because she's, still not a full grown person yet. Any adult who scolds, your first reaction might be, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. The grown up is, saying something to me. But then she realizes, well, who is this person who is chewing me out? Who is, who is he to say what is decent and what isn't decent? Okay. So he comes back with, girls, I don't want to argue with you. After this, come in here with your shoulders covered. It's our policy. Okay. And then the next paragraph, all this while, the customers have been showing up with their cards, but sheep seeing a scene. They all get bunched up on Stokesy, who shook out a paper bag as gently as peeling a peach, not wanting to miss a word. I could feel in the silence everybody getting nervous. Most of all, Langle, who asked me, Sammy, have you rung up this purchase? So Langle is kind of getting nervous too, because if you see, it's not just this sort of age difference. There's a class difference going on here. In other words, it's this battle of the classes. I may be just a teenage girl, but I come from an upper strata than you do, a manager at the A&P. Okay. And then skipping down, the girls and who had blamed them. I'm on the maybe last 8 lines of the page there. The girls and who had blamed them are in a hurry to get out. So I say, in other words, they're in a hurry to get out. So I say, I like that. So I quit to Langle, loud enough for them to hear, hoping they'll stop and watch me, their unsuspected hero. Okay, so he has this moment of crisis. And I think it's a sort of a crisis of who is it whom you identify more with? On whose side are you? The side of the girls with their act of rebellion, their desire to be their own persons, perhaps, or the sheep and the Langles of the world. Okay, and so he has this moment, and it comes to him, I suppose, in a flash, where he just says, I quit. Now, it could be that he wants the girls to like him or something like that, their unsuspected hero, right? But watch what happens. They keep right on going into the electric eye. The door flies open. They flicker across the lot to their car. Queenie and Plaid and big, tall Goonie. Not that as raw materials she was so bad. Leaving me with Langle and a kink in his eyebrow. Did you say something, Sammy? Okay, so he says, I quit. And then Langle looks at him and says, did you say something? Sammy has another choice at this moment. He could say, me? I didn't say anything. Okay, or he could just say, oh, no, I was just fooling. But no, he follows through. He said, I quit. I thought you did. You didn't have to embarrass them. It was they who were embarrassing us. Okay, 3 girls coming in bathing suits into a grocery store really isn't embarrassing the grocery store per se, except that I suppose if you're the manager, you think, okay, I have to be the one to say something, of course, but you don't. You don't have to say anything. They're on their way out. I started to say something that came out as fiddle-dee-doo. Fiddle-dee-doo is something that Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind would say. So he started to say something that came out as fiddle-dee-doo. It's a saying of my grandmother's, and I know she would have been pleased. I'm not quite sure what he was going to say, but I think it starts with a fa and it ends with an oo. Okay, fa, oo, but it came out as fiddle-dee-doo. I don't think you know what you're saying, Langle said. I know you don't, I said, but I do. I pulled a bow out of the back of my apron, started shrugging off my shoulders. A couple of customers that had been heading to my slot began to knock against each other like scared pigs in a chute. Okay, so they're either sheep or pigs in a chute. Langle sighs and begins to look very patient and old and gray. He's been a friend of my parents for years. Sammy, you don't want to do this to your mom and dad. Okay, now let's just try to keep some perspective here. Sammy is a cashier at a grocery store. Okay, this probably isn't his entire life. This probably, and maybe for somebody like Stokesy, the person at the other cash register, who's married, kids, maybe it's really important to him, okay, and maybe it's important, financially to Sammy or his parents, but how important is this really, sort of in the broad scheme? You don't want to do this to your mom and dad, he tells me. It's true, I don't. But it seems to me that once you begin a gesture, it's fatal not to go through with it. So once he said, I quit, and maybe he's having some regrets now. For him, he has to follow through. I fold the apron Sammy stitched on the red pocket, put it on the counter, drop the bow tie off on top of it. The bow tie is theirs if you've ever wondered. You'll feel this for the rest of your life, L'Engle says. Okay, now, again, imagine you have a job down at the Jamba Juice. And you just decide one day, you know what, this isn't for me, or my manager's a jerk. I don't like the way the manager treats customers. I don't like the way the manager treats me. That's it. I'm out of here. I quit. Well, you don't want to do this to your parents. You'll say, my parents, I don't know, I'll just get a different job. Okay. But if the manager of the Jamba Juice said to you, you will feel this for the rest of your life, you would have to say, are you kidding me? I have bigger plans than spending the rest of my life at a Jamba Juice. Okay, but you'll feel this for the rest of your life. To which Sammy says, and I know that's true too. You'll feel this for the rest of your life, L'Engle says, and I know that's true too. So Sammy is agreeing, yes, I will feel this for the rest of my life. But he can't be talking about losing his job at the A&P. He can't be thinking when he's 75 years old, he'll be looking back and saying, boy, I really shouldn't have quit my job at the A&P. He can't be thinking that, okay? But if we say to ourselves, okay, that moment, that epiphany where he says, I quit, is the climax. And he has a chance to back down, but he doesn't, okay? Then what is it that he's going to be feeling for the rest of his life? Because he knows it's true. And to me, he has this recognition, oh, I am one of those type of people. I am one of those type of people who, when they see something wrong, even something small and minor, is going to stand up and make a statement, okay? I often wonder, somebody like a great hero like Cesar Chavez, you know, he didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, I'm Cesar Chavez. People are expecting me to state my opinion on something. It probably is something that sort of evolved. At some point in Cesar Chavez's life, he must have come to the realization, I am one of those type of people who stand up and who will fight against injustice. Okay, so he goes outside, last paragraph, I look around for my girls, but they're gone, of course, and there's nobody there except, I guess, more sheep, more pigs coming into the chute. Looking back in the big windows over the bags of peat moss and aluminum, lawn furniture stacked on the pavement, I could see L'Engle in my place in the slot, checking the sheep through. His face was dark gray and his back stiff, as if he had had an injection of iron. So that's who it seems to be sort of almost like a choice. Those people who either sort of follow the rules like sheep, or those people who enforce the rules also like sheep. You know, L'Engle is just, we have a policy, and so it's my job to tell you to dress. You know, don't wear bathing suits, cover your shoulders when you come into the A&P, okay? And my stomach kind of fell as I felt how hard the world was going to be to me hereafter. And again, it can't be just about quitting. It has to be his recognition of the type of person he is. He is the kind of person who is not going to go the easy way. He's not the kind of person who is going to become a sheep when he goes to a grocery store or in any other aspects of his life. And the world is going to be harder. The world is easier on the sheep, the rule followers. The world is not as nice and not as kind, not as easy on those people who violate the rules, who push the rules, who ask questions about the rules. And at this moment, Sammy recognizes that he's one of those people. Okay, so if it's a conflict between the sheep and the conventional and the rule followers, and this act of, I think, somewhat minor rebellion, okay, of these three girls, represented by these three girls walking in, on whose side is Sammy? And I think Sammy at this moment realizes, oh, I am one of those people who will stand up for the people who question the rules. I'm going to stand up when I see people mistreated. And so, yes, as the last line says, life is going to be harder for him hereafter. And so if his epiphany is that moment when he says, I quit, it's that moment of recognition, isn't it? Is that revelation, oh, I'm one of those kinds of people. Okay, let's take a look at our second story for today, The Man Descend, Rainclouds by Leslie Marmon Silko. She's a Native American writer and writes about oftentimes different subject. So let's jump on over there. Okay, in The Man to Send Rainclouds, I think there's sort of a temptation to think that the protagonists are either Leon or Ken because we start with them. Okay, but I think as we go on and we say, okay, well, who's the one who really has the conflict or who has the epiphany? It's probably Father Paul, isn't it? Look at the first sentence. They found him under a big cottonwood tree. Okay, there's a style, and it's very typical, and we've actually seen it before. I didn't call attention to it. Sometimes it's more obvious than other times. But here, write down these three Latin words: in medias res, INMEDIAS, res, RES, in medias res. And what it means is, it literally means in the beginning of things. But what it essentially means is, if it's applied to a work of literature, is that things have already started. Events have already occurred before the story starts. And so what Silka likes to do is to make you, by making assumptions about who you are, it actually draws you in and makes you part of the native culture that makes perfect sense to Ken and Leon. They found him under a big cottonwood tree. You would say, well, who's they and who's him? Okay. And so, well, it turns out that it's Teofilo, and he's an old man, and he died up there under a big cottonwood tree. He is tending the sheep. Okay. And so they got the sheep back together, and they come and they wrap him in a red blanket. They're going to take him down in the pickup truck. But look at the second body paragraph. Before they wrapped the old man, Leon took a piece of string out of his pocket and tied a small gray feather in the old man's long white hair. So clearly he's following some sort of ritual here. Ken gave him the paint. Okay, Ken gave him the paint. Now I, as a non-Native American, certainly not a member of this particular tribe, would say, gave him the paint. What paint? What are you talking about? But the fact that Silko puts it that way, Ken gave him the paint, again, is sort of like assuming we know what's going on. So we feel invited almost to see this from Ken and Leon's perspective. Okay. Across the brown wrinkled forehead, he drew a streak of white, and along the high cheekbones, he drew a strip of blue paint. He paused, watched Ken throw pinches of cornmeal and pollen into the air. That's probably some sort of a fertility ritual, to the idea of to grow. Corn is very important to survival. And fluttered the small gray feather. Then Leon painted with yellow under the old man's broad nose, and finally he painted a green across the chin, and he smiled. Okay. And so, again, we can say, all right, well, I don't think it takes that much to kind of figure out what the paint means, right? Streak of white on top of blue, on top of yellow, on top of green. Well, white, I think, are the clouds, aren't they? Okay. And then blue is the sky, and yellow is the corn, and green is the grass or the ground. Okay. Send us rain clouds, grandfather. Okay. So that's what that's what all this ritual is for, is to get the recently deceased to send rain clouds for those who are still living. Okay, so it's a culture and a religion that's very much in touch with those who have passed, that, they have a role to play. If you go through the rituals right, then the past person will be able and be in a position to send you rain clouds. So skip down a couple of paragraphs towards the bottom there. They turned off the highway onto the sandy Pueblo road. Not long after they passed the store in the post office, they saw Father Paul's car coming towards them. When he recognized their faces, he slowed his car and waved them to stop. The young priest rolled down his car window. "Did you find old Teofilo?" He asked loudly. And this is the moment to say, yeah, we found him. He was dead, and he's actually in the back of the pickup truck right now that we're driving. But Leon stopped the truck. "Good morning, Father. We were just out to the sheep camp. Everything is okay now." Well, that's really interesting, because in one sense you would say, well, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, is they found the old man dead. But from Leon's perspective, no, everything is okay. maybe a different idea about death. And then on the next page, he says, "Thank God for that. Teofilo is a very old man. You really shouldn't allow him to stay at the sheep camp alone." And again, here's the chance to say, well, he's dead. But no, instead he says, no, he won't do that anymore now. Okay, so again, he's not exactly lying to the priest, but he's not giving the full truth, is he? And then the priest, I love these words, "Well, I'm glad you understand." Okay. It's the priest, of course, who doesn't understand. Okay, and he doesn't understand really if he were to watch the feather and the cornmeal being tossed with the pollen, or the painting of the face. He wouldn't understand any of that either. Okay, but what he's saying to them is, "I'm glad you understand. I hope I'll be seeing you at Mass this week. We missed you last Sunday." So apparently Father Paul takes roll. "See if you can get old Teofilo to come with you." The priest smiled and waved at them as they drove away. Okay. And so what we have here is the introduction of the character. And I think that Father Paul is ultimately the protagonist, because it's he who needs to sort of grow. It's he who needs sort of this epiphany. He's the one who doesn't understand, but he thinks it's the others who don't understand. Okay. And I just wanted to skip down and just part of Soko's style here, right on page 1210. About a third of the way down the page. And just this one, it's a small sentence, but just the way it's expressed, I think, is very telling. "It was noontime now because the church bells rang the Angelus." The Angelus is the music that church bells play, and they especially play at noon, and then you'll hear the bell ring 12 times to say it's noon. Okay, "It was noontime now because the church bells rang the Angelus." I think you and I would say it differently, that the cause and effect here seems a little bit backwards. You and I might say, the church bells rang the Angelus because it was noontime now, right? The church bells are ringing because it's noon. But look how it's actually expressed. It was noontime because the church bells rang. Well, that's confusing cause and effect, but it might make you, and then it says they ate coffee and beans with hot bread. And so it's really the Native Americans, the indigenous people, who are hearing it was noontime now because the church bells rang. Well, of course, church bells were something imported, right? There weren't church bells before the Europeans arrived. There wasn't an Angelus. And while we're at it, there was no sense of, well, what's noon? Okay. That each one of these now, the reason why when they think of it, it must be noon because the bells are ringing, they kind of have it backwards saying, it must be noon because the bells are ringing. They think, okay, it's somehow the bells ringing the Angelus make it noon, as opposed to it being noon makes the bells ring. It's just sort of a little toss-away sentence, but again, what it does is by sort of disrupting sort of the normal flow, the cause and effect of the universe, it's kind of putting you in their position to understand a little bit what it feels like to be them. Okay. And then Leon thinks, you know what? Maybe we could get some holy water to bring to the funeral, okay? So that Grandpa won't be thirsty. Now, again, I come from a Catholic tradition. I don't think you have to be a Catholic to know, well, the purpose of holy water is not so that the corpse won't be thirsty, okay? Purpose of holy water is just a type of blessing, okay? So Leon still wants the holy water, which is, a Catholic thing, but he wants it for his own understanding of why that would be a good thing, okay? And so he goes off and he sees Father Paul, right? And here, he has a chair and he offers it to Leon. You want to sit on the chair on page 1211. About maybe not quite a fourth of the way down the page. "No, thank you, Father. I only came to ask you if you would bring your holy water to the graveyard." The priest turned away from Leon, looked out the window at the patio full of shadows and the dining room windows of the nuns' cloister across the patio. The curtains were heavy. The light from within faintly penetrated. So he's looking across and he sees where the nuns are hanging out. It was impossible to see the nuns inside eating dinner. So he's just kind of looking over. This is a community, the Catholic sort of community, the priests on one side, the nuns on the other. And he says, "Why didn't you tell me he was dead? I could have brought the last rites anyway." Leon smiled. It wasn't necessary, Father. The priest stared down at his scuffed brown loafers and the worn hem of his cassock. For Christian burial, it was necessary. Okay, so the priest has his rules. You need to have last rites if you're going to have a Christian burial. You can also see that he's looking at his scuffed brown loafers, the worn hem of his cassock. He's not getting rich doing that. He must be wondering, am I having any positive effect at all? His voice was distant, and Leon thought that his blue eyes looked tired. So Father Paul, at least from Leon's perspective, he looks tired, he looks worn, his brown loafers are scuffed. He must be thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I here? Now he is trying to, spread the religion, spread the gospel. And so he's a missionary. It's his job is to save as many souls as he possibly can from the Catholic perspective. It's okay, Father. We just want him to have plenty of water. Okay. So when Leon says that to Father Paul must be thinking, you don't even understand what the holy water is for. So look at the language that follows. The priest sank down into the green chair. So you could just imagine he didn't sit down. He just sank down. He just flops down into the green chair. Just sinks even deeper into the green chair. Picked up a glossy missionary magazine. He turned the colored pages full of lepers and pagans without looking at them. And so he's got this missionary magazine. Maybe when he was a young priest, he thought, I'm going to go save the lepers and the pagans. I'm going to work with the lepers and the pagans, and I'm going to save their bodies and save their souls. And he's flipping through this glossy magazine the way that other people flip through fashion magazines or travel magazines, that sort of thing. I think it's kind of comical because it's the sort of thing you grab when you say, why am I here? Okay, I can't do that, Leon. There should have been last rites and a funeral mass at the very least. And so he says, so Leon accepts that fine, and he's ready to leave. But then Father Paul says, wait. Okay. And he throws on an overcoat, and he grabs the he grabs the water and brings it with him. Okay. And then the last paragraph on 12:11, the priest approached the grave slowly, wondering how they had managed to dig into the frozen ground. And then he remembered that this was New Mexico. Okay. And saw a pile of cold, loose sand beside the hole. So this is not a very fertile place. And this is a place, the ground isn't frozen because there's just not that much water there. And so maybe there's this sort of recognition that how important water is, how to this particular culture. It's not just about religion. It's not just about going through the rituals. It's about survival. It's about whether their tribe will live or die. Okay. If we look at the last page, first complete paragraph there, his fingers were stiff and it took him a long time to twist the lid off the holy water. Drops of water fell on the red blanket and soaked into dark, icy spots. He sprinkled the grave, and the water disappeared almost before it touched the dim, cold sand. So even though it's cold, the ground is so parched that it just sucks up immediately the water. It reminded him of something. He tried to remember what it was, because he thought if he could remember, he might understand this. Okay, it's very ambiguous, this, isn't it? Understand what exactly? He sprinkled more water. He shook the container until it was empty, and the water fell through the light from sundown like August rain that fell while the sun was still shining, almost disappearing before it touched the wilted squash flowers. Okay, so in the future, they are where food is going to be grown if the water comes and the food grows, then the tribe survives, right? This moment where it reminded him of something, he tried to remember what it was because he thought if he could remember, he might understand this. I think what Silko is pointing to is something maybe beyond words. I don't know if you've had this experience before, but sometimes you're looking up at the night sky, and there's a constellation of stars, for example, called the Pleiades, and it's this little knot of 7 or 9 stars. They all seem to be kind of clustered together in this spot. And for me, for some reason, if I look right at it, I can't see it so well. But when I kind of catch it in the corner of my eye, sometimes when you catch something in the corner of your eye, you see it a little bit better. And to me, this is one of those sort of tip of the brain sort of moments. I'm having a deja vu kind of moment here, but is it deja vu? And it's just this desire to kind of understand something maybe which is beyond truly comprehending and understanding. But to me, um, this is his epiphany of a kind. I admit it's ambiguous. It's not entirely clear what he has now recognized, and he's not entirely clear on what he's recognized now. It's just something on the tip of his brain. But if I were to sort of think about it a little bit and tease it out, thinking in terms of conflict, if he is the protagonist, then it is his conflict, and I think his conflict would be his desire to convert as many people as possible to Catholicism. He's a missionary. That's what he wants to do. He's living in a pretty stark place. He's wearing a worn cassock. His loafers are all scuffed. It's probably not what he dreamed of when he first started subscribing to the missionary magazine with all the pictures of pagans and uh, such lepers. And so, but he's here and he's trying to do the best he can. And he's doing it with people who have their own culture, who have their own religion, who are willing to take parts of the religion, say the holy water. And apparently once in a while they show up at church too, because, hey, as Father Paul seems to suggest, well, we didn't see you last week. Certainly they've been there sometimes. And so maybe with Father Paul, maybe what he realizes is, if I'm going to have any effect whatsoever, I'm going to have to meet these people part way. Okay, maybe more than part way, maybe most of the way. So he brings the holy water to the grave, and he uses it in a way in which it was not intended, where you just kind of open up the bottle and just empty the contents of the holy water. But it seemed to satisfy the people, and maybe that's the best he's going to be able to do, and he needs to be satisfied with it. The short story ends not from his perspective so much. The last 5 lines or so, the priest walked away slowly. Leon watched him climb the hill, and then he had disappeared within the tall, thick walls. When he had disappeared within the tall, thick walls. Okay, so we see him walking away slowly, probably contemplatively. He's thinking. He's probably not entirely satisfied, probably not entirely happy with himself for what he did. He didn't hold to his guns. He didn't say, nope, sorry, he didn't have last rites, so I'm not going to come to the grave. No, he did. He came. And he's probably thinking, okay, what now as I move forward and try to be an effective priest to these people? As he's leaving, Leon turned to look up the high blue mountains and the deep snow that reflected a faint red light from the west. He felt good because it was finished, and he was happy about the sprinkling of the holy water. Now the old man could send them big thunderclouds for sure. Okay, so Father Paul doesn't say this out loud. This is something that he's thinking, but I'm wondering if Father Paul knew why Leon was so pleased, because, okay, now we're going to get lots and lots of rain. Okay, I don't know. Would he be happy, or would he say, no, that's not the point of holy water? Okay, or would he be happy because now Leon has embraced part of the symbology of Catholicism? Okay. So it's the resolution is kind of hard to know where we go from here, but the priests, sort of bent some of his rules. Maybe he'll find different ways of meeting them where they are, so that he can be helpful to them. Okay, guys. Don't forget to take the quiz, and see you next time. Bye.